Where is Kanye West with like the Joe Biden does not care about Hawaiians? Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Politics Podcast. I'm Hannah Cox with Brad Polumbo. This week, Biden finally makes an appearance in Hawaii. Canadians are facing a news blackout, and are we preparing young people to graduate college? Let's jump in. Well, I wonder if Biden has been eating any fish this week since he finally took his butt down to the island of Hawaii to visit the damage and visit with the people who've had their entire livelihood stripped from them. And as you might expect, he has been a walking gaffe machine since he landed. It's been a disgrace.
Yeah, so the situation in Hawaii is still catastrophic. Over 115 people are confirmed dead. Many, many more are missing, and it's now the wildfires there are now the deadliest natural disaster in Hawaii history. And just for context, folks, we talked about this a little bit last week, but for context, the fires started on August 8, and they really hit crisis levels over the next day or two. The White House did put out a statement and approve an emergency declaration and extend federal aid. It did that on August 10, but Biden was still on vacation, and he stayed on vacation for multiple more days.
Wait, hold on. He was on vacation?
Yes, he was on vacation, a multi-week vacation. And he's actually, I believe, only taking a break from his vacation. He's going back to vacation after leaving Hawaii.
Where is Kanye West with like the Joe Biden does not care about Hawaiians?
Action of the spirit of the people of southern Louisiana and Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Do you remember, Brad, you were young, but do you remember when George W. Bush did visit Hurricane Katrina, but was photographed like in an airplane, looking at the damage? Because you couldn't really get in and out, right?
No, I don't. I was too young to remember that.
Oh, people were inflamed over it. So to me, that this is flying under the radar. That's just another thing with the media giving this guy a pass and not treating Democrats and Republicans the same, because you would have thought that George Bush caused Hurricane Katrina the way that they acted over that.
Well, and with Trump a few times, they criticized his response to like hurricanes in Puerto Rico and other stuff. And I have to be honest, I think these criticisms are always kind of overwrought in that like the president visiting only is symbolic mostly, right? Actually being there. But at the same time, there's some obvious double standards in how these things are evaluated against Democrats and Republicans. Like they were so critical of Trump's response to disasters when he was president. And now Biden is, I think this response to the Hawaii wildfires is probably the worst I've ever seen or can remember of a leader of how they've responded, because he only now, so almost 2 weeks later, is finally been to Hawaii just on Monday. And he's already, I think, headed back out to go back on vacation. And he was there for just a few hours before really putting his foot in his mouth. Take a look at this clip of him speaking to an audience in Hawaii and immediately making about himself and also telling a factually challenged anecdote once again. Take a listen.
I don't want to compare difficulties, but we have a little sense, Jill and I, what it's like to lose a home. Years ago, now 15 years ago, I was in Washington doing Meet the Press. It was a sunny Sunday, and lightning struck at home on a little lake. It's outside of our home, not a lake, a big pond, and hit a wire and came up underneath our home into the heating ducts, the air conditioning duct. To make a long story short, I almost lost my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat. But all kidding aside, I watched the firefighters, the way they responded. There's an old expression. I grew up right across the street from a fire hall in Claymont, Delaware. And the expression is, God made man, then he made a few firefighters. You're all crazy, thank God. The only people who run into flames to help other people. And they ran into flames. save my wife and save my family. Not a joke. The smoke, and the firefighters here can tell you, sometimes smoke is so thick from the windows out, it was that thick inside the home. And we were insured. We did not have any problem, but being out of our home for a better part of a year was difficult. I can only imagine what it's like to lose your home.
So, Hannah, it sounds like a really harrowing tale about the time Biden's wife almost died in a wild house fire that consumed the whole home up into flames. There's just one problem. That isn't true. Also, I just have to note, side note, he sounds dead. He sounds so old and decrepit, and it just does not fill me with confidence the way he looks and sounds when speaking in public. But anyway, the story he tells here is just simply untethered from reality. So I went back and I found the Associated Press's reporting about this incident he's referencing from 2004. Headline: Lightning sparks fire at Biden's house. Lightning struck the home of Senator Joseph Biden, starting a small fire that was contained to the kitchen. In Wilmington, Delaware, lightning struck the home of Senator Joseph Biden, starting a small fire that was contained to the kitchen. No one was injured in Sunday's fire, which started amid a storm that caused serious flooding in Pennsylvania and knocked out power to hundreds of Delaware homes and businesses. Biden is Delaware's senior senator and the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. His wife, Jill, reported the fire Sunday morning, officials said. Many lightning strikes were reported in Newcastle County, where the Biden home is. Firefighters arrived to find heavy smoke coming from the house, but were able to keep the flames from spreading beyond the kitchen. Luckily, we got it pretty early, one firefighter said. The fire was under control in 20 minutes. So, Hannah, he's seriously comparing the fact that he had a fire in his house that was contained to the kitchen, and he's claiming that meant his wife and his cat almost died, and then he's comparing that to the suffering and devastation of people whose entire communities have been destroyed. It's just tone deaf and offensive on so many levels I don't even know where to begin.
Right. While I believe in the First Amendment and free speech strongly, I also believe strongly that many people should opt out of using their right. And Joe Biden is one of them, because every time he opens his mouth, he says some of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. I mean, from the very beginning, just making this moment about yourself. This is not the time for personal anecdotes. I actually do see a role in the president making appearances like this, visiting communities that have suffered tragedies. I think that is part of their role as a figurehead to hopefully be unifying, to show, the nation's support. And I think that's a kind of a beautiful piece of symbolism, and good leaders can bring a lot of calm and reassurance in those kinds of times. But Biden is not that leader. Instead, he comes in, makes it about himself, once again tells a whopper. And I've noticed every time he lies, he has a tell. He says, I'm literally not joking. It's not a joke. I'm not joking. Every time he says that, he's lying. I've been tracking this for a minute. So, and then just the elitism of it. Sir, your heinous tragedy is that you almost lost your 1967 very valuable Corvette.
You also didn't almost lose it because the fire never left the kitchen.
Yeah, but even if you had, these people have lost everything, and many of them didn't have that much to begin with, right? You had insurance. Many of these people did not have insurance. So let's say your house did burn down, which it in fact did not. It still is in no way on scale with what these people in this community are dealing with. And also, not only do you have the audacity to stay on vacation on the taxpayer's dime and not visit for 2 weeks, but you also have yet to waive the Jones Act, which we covered last week, because you are bought and paid for and sold by the labor union. So you still have not done the smallest thing you actually could do to ensure that policies are not getting in the way of the response for these people and making it easier for them to start rebuilding. So to me, this was just outrageous. I don't know how people defend this guy, and I'm with you. He does sound completely decrepit. He's like, it hit a lake. No, it was a pond. No, maybe it was actually the neighborhood to the side of me. What is happening with the storytelling? And you know what? Yeah. He doesn't have an excuse, because this guy isn't speaking off the cuff, right? He is the president of the United States. He has speechwriters. He has teleprompters. He has a whole team of people helping decide what comes out of his mouth. And yet we still get this. Make it make sense. In contrast, I think another better example actually was Obama when he responded to Charleston after the shooting at the Black church there. I remember that being a really beautiful moment when he spoke at some of the funerals and like leading the congregation in Amazing Grace and like gave this really fantastic speech of hope and vision for the future. And man, like I couldn't stand Obama's policies, but just the fact that we've even lost that element in our political leaders since then, right? That ability to just show empathy and care and concern for others and relate to people. Like it is really moving downhill so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we just discussed this a few weeks ago with Biden lying to that Gold Star family
Yeah.
who lost their son during his disastrous, botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, and saying that his son, died in Iraq, which is the story, as we explained, that's really not factually accurate. He died of brain cancer that he may have gotten from his time in the military. But he came home. He served as an elected office, and then years later died of this cancer. So it's just not the same. And yet Biden has this instinct to do two things that I find very bizarre and strange. One is constantly in the face of tragedy, rather than comfort people, make it about himself. Maybe he's trying to relate to people, but that's not a great way to do it, I don't think, in those situations. And then two, to lie or to exaggerate or distort anecdotes about his own life, even though he's been fact-checked on them so many times publicly. Like even CNN has on their website fact-checked him, but they don't like the way that when Trump lied about his crowd size at his inauguration, right? He lied. Every media outlet covered this about how dishonest, and there was hours and hours of coverage on it. When Biden tells these lies, CNN will like post an article to their website that fact checks it as like one bullet in a story. So it's not like they don't do it, but they just don't hyperventilate over it the same way they would if a Republican president lied about their house burning down while speaking to disaster victims and essentially comparing his almost losing his Corvette, which didn't even happen, but almost losing his Corvette to their suffering and destruction they're living through. They would, of course, 24-hour news coverage that, but it's just a complete double standard. And you know what's really interesting, Hannah? Hard to know how pervasive this is. Hawaii is a very blue state. Very progressive people live in Hawaii, mostly. But the president is not being received well by at least some of the residents in Hawaii. Take a look at this news clip.
There are a bunch of people out here. They've been here for hours. A bunch of them are protesting. They have their makeshift signs, cardboard signs, a lot of them saying, as we've been talking about, that he's too late. Some of them feel that he should have been here much earlier. Other signs that say actions speak louder than words. So hearing a lot from the people here, as well as Hawaiian flags.
Yeah, so look, maybe these are just a handful of people that aren't representative of the whole island or the whole state. But I can't help but think that even, liberals or people who supported him in 2020 are probably not satisfied with this guy being on vacation. And when people went up to him during his vacation and asked him about this, and he said, no comment, no comment. It's like, I imagine that even if you were generally positive towards him, if you were affected by this and saw the way he was handling it, you'd be pissed off. So I would bet that sentiment is more widely shared than you might suspect, actually, on that island and throughout the state of Hawaii.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And this tends to happen when progressives have to actually live with the consequences of the policies and the politicians that are pushing them that they supported. You tend to find that they don't really like it. They often move states. And what we're seeing in Canada right now is something similar, where the people are all of a sudden having to live with the fallout from a piece of legislation that was passed earlier this year that is now putting them in danger while they deal with their own natural disasters. There's been a lot of fire outbreaks across Canada. And while people are trying to get information, and that is a timely need, they're finding that they can't actually access news on their social media websites. Let's roll this TikTok.
Canadians are no longer allowed to access the news on social media, and what I'm about to show you is absolutely insane. I knew it was coming, but it's here. This morning I wake up to this message on Instagram from this viral account that has almost 700,000 followers. To be honest, I'm over Watergate. I'm over the 75 hard. I don't want them to share my content if that's all they're going to be sharing anyway, but that's not the point of this video. So I go to their account just to check it out, and what I see next I don't know. Is there an explanation? I don't like what is the reason? Look here. People in Canada can't see this content. In response to Canadian government legislation, news content cannot be viewed in Canada. Please somebody tell me what the reason is, because I cannot understand it. Not to come off as ignorant or anything, but 2020, that little news widget on my Apple phone was deleted. I was sick and tired of every day waking up and seeing that little widget with negative ass news all day, every day. If we as Canadians cannot access other types of news on social media, where are we getting our news from? This essentially means that the only news that we're going to get is from CP24, CBC. If you are not terrified about this, I don't know what to tell you. And I find it hard to imagine that people even in the States know that this is happening. Anyways, I just want to share that because I knew it was coming. In fact, me and my youngest daughter were talking about it yesterday. I was telling her in the car ride, and then I woke up and this is the first time I've seen this. So I'm scared.
So for those of you listening on audio, she's actually showing an Instagram account, which is a news organization's Instagram account that she's trying to view in Canada to get real-time information, and it is blocked out. She can't see it. And when she says, I doubt people in the States even know this is going on, you know who knew it was going on? Me. Because I have been tracking this kind of legislation that is causing this across many countries and in the United States right now. So earlier this month, the social media giant Facebook began blocking Canadian news on its social media platforms, which include Instagram, in response to Canada's new Online News Act, which passed in June and is expected to take effect by the end of the year. The law would, in the future, require companies like Meta and Google to pay media outlets for news content they share on their platforms. The news ban was called dangerous this week by wildfire evacuees and reckless by the Office of the Heritage Minister, while wildfires forced tens of thousands from their home in various Canadian territories. In a social post, Heritage Minister Pascal called on Meta to reinstate news sharing on Facebook. News organizations, including CBC, Radio Canada, have also asked Canada's Competition Bureau to investigate Meta's decision to block Canadian news, calling it anti-competitive. We think there's a workable solution, said Paul Deegan, president and CEO of News Media Canada, which represents 570 news publishers across the country. What we're saying to Meta is the regulations aren't drafted yet. Pick up a pen, put down your saber, and let's try to work through this together. So in short, Canada passed a very anti-free speech, very anti-capitalist piece of legislation earlier this year that basically said to social media platforms, if there are news links, articles, resources being shared on your platforms, you have to pay the publishers of those links or you will get in trouble. And so as predicted, as we've been saying for some time with various pieces of legislation like this, what the social media companies are doing is just blocking those kinds of links because they have no need to pay those companies for those kinds of resources. The truth is that many of their users are not clicking that kind of stuff anyways. It actually benefits most of the companies more to have access to the platforms and their users than it goes the other way. And so basically to get ahead of this regulation taking effect, Meta had gone ahead and put all the protocols in place to stop this kind of service. Now that there is a natural disaster, we are seeing the colossal consequences of this very bad legislation that is pushed by failing legacy media, unions, and progressives who intentionally are trying to pass these kinds of pieces of legislation, not just to take more control of the tech sector, but also, I would argue at times, to hinder new media and independent media, because as you see more and more resources coming about that people can opt into, we find that people are getting their news from sources like us versus the New York Times. And guess who doesn't like that? The people who can control the narrative when there are only the top news sites that get to publish information. And so this is backfiring majorly, but instead of reckoning with their own policy failures and bad ideas, they're instead trying to blame Facebook for this being in place and now harming people as they're trying to respond to a national disaster.
Yeah, I have a couple points on this, but one, I think these Canadian officials are demagoguing. They're using these wildfires to attack Facebook for the predictable response that they made to their meddling legislation. However, they're being very misleading because, yes, news is not available on Facebook, on Instagram, on these social media apps, but every Canadian can still open Safari and go to www.whatevernewswebsite.com. They can still go to Google and search latest wildfire news. Like, they aren't actually blocked from getting access to irrelevant information. They just can't get it into their social media feeds because the Canadian government tried to pull this nanny state nonsense and force Facebook to pay publishers for publishers being allowed to market their products on the platform, which is crazy because, Facebook has actually like really reduced news sharing. And you and I know this. It's hurt us both personally quite a bit in their algorithm. But publishers have always been able to profit off of Facebook sharing it because when content is shared and then you get more views on your articles or your videos, you get more ad revenue from your website or from your YouTube page or whatever. So they always have gotten, it's not like they're just having their work stolen and ripped off. When news gets shared on Facebook, publishers do profit through the click-throughs and going to their website and everything. It's just that, if somebody looks at the headline on Facebook without actually clicking into it, then yeah, Facebook gets some content, but you get brand exposure. Like in Facebook, it's a pretty small slice of what they do. So this idea that they were going to shell out huge sums to these publishers, it just never made any sense, and they have no obligation to do it. And in fact, the legislation even said, like, you must do this or stop having it on your platform. And they were like, all right, deal. And now they're all mad at Facebook. It's like, no, you guys messed this up. And now any inconvenience that Canadians are experiencing, which I think they're exaggerating, but it is, it is messed up that if you're a Canadian, you go on Instagram and you're not allowed to view certain things. That is not how I think any of us want it to be. But the blame for that is not on Instagram. It's not on Facebook. And you and I have both criticized these companies in the past for some of the dumb stuff they've done. But in this case, they are not the problem. It is the Canadian government's meddling tech regulations and the predictable, this always happens. When they try to rewrite or micromanage industries they don't understand, their actions have second order and third order consequences they never predicted. And then they're like, oh, who could have seen this coming? Literally all of us. Literally every tech policy free market person in the world, but not your politicians in Canada, who I think just assumed that the world would bend to their will and the way they thought things should be.
Yeah, this comes down to a fundamental point I've made over and over, which is that I can be very critical of tech companies and social media platforms, but you don't have a right to other people's property. You don't have a right to use Facebook's property to market your links, your website. I've found it extraordinarily beneficial to do so in the past. Now they've changed things. It's not as beneficial to do now. I can complain about that, but I still recognize that that is well within their rights. I'm not entitled to somebody else's company to access it or to utilize it for my own business benefits. But this is more indicative of the book, I think, that I had to read in college called Who Moved My Cheese, about this phenomenon that often happens in business when revenue streams change, when the market dynamics shift. Instead of figuring out where the income can come from now and redoing their business models, a lot of companies that should die, that deserve to die, they don't want to innovate. They don't want to try to do things differently. And so what they instead try to do is use the government to force their old way of making money to work. And that's what you see these news publishers doing. That's what you see many of these outlets coming together to do. You're right. People can still go to their websites, right? But increasingly they're not. And that's because, one, people don't trust the mainstream media all that much anymore. And two, it's because how people are getting their news, that mechanism has changed. I don't go to one dedicated website every morning to get my news. I don't even go to 5 dedicated websites to get my news. What I do is I go to Twitter and I scroll and I open links that are interesting to me and I see what other people are talking about. And the entire dynamic has shifted. And that actually has opened up a ton of new ways to make money on news and information. It's actually opened up broader audiences for those who are innovative and scrappy and want to take advantage of it, like us, like many other people in new media and independent media. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to work that hard. They're dinosaurs, they're boomers. And so what they want to do is try to force these new ways of doing things to pay them out. And it backfired majorly because they didn't play ball. And now it actually, I would argue, is probably hurting people's ability to get quick real-time information, just because the way people tend to get information is not to go to these websites, right? They probably don't even know a lot of these companies exist. Because I mean, I might open a link on Twitter or Facebook here and there, but I'm not necessarily paying attention to what website published it and then, clocking them as somebody I'm going to go to independently. So they really screwed themselves all over. And I want to play this clip of Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, pitching an absolutely hissy fit over it.
And I'm going to make a comment on this. It is so inconceivable that a company like Facebook is choosing to put corporate profits ahead of ensuring that local news organizations can get up-to-date information to Canadians and reach them where Canadians spend a lot of their time, online, on social media, on Facebook. Facebook made billions of dollars in profits over the past years, including off of Canadians. And we recently passed legislation that says, Facebook, if you're going to be sharing news or work done by Canadian journalists or local news, you have to make sure they're compensated for it fairly. Well, instead of making sure that local journalists are fairly paid for keeping Canadians informed on things like wildfires, Facebook is blocking news from its sites.
So, Brad, what I think is really interesting in his whole criticism, right, is that Facebook has made a lot of money and that they are therefore so greedy for not paying it back. But number one, it's any company's job to make money. And if they are making money, it's because they are providing a service of value to people. And secondarily, I want to know why it is always considered greedy or selfish for companies to look out for their bottom line, but it's not considered greedy or selfish for companies that are failing to come in and use the government to hold their competitors hostage.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This whole thing smacks of the taxi drivers trying to ban Uber to me. Like the old way of doing things that was less effective, less efficient. They want to kind of use the government to hold on to their golden goose. But I guess I find the whole thing so dishonest because Canada literally had an example. Something very similar already happened in Australia, where they tried to pass these regulations and Facebook's like, all right, we're going to stop doing news. And then I believe Australia actually rolled back the regulations in response to this, but I'm not 100% on that part. But anyway, like Canada had an example. They knew what they were going to do. And I'm sure that they were either publicly or behind the scenes talking to Meta, and Meta told them, this is what we will do if you pass this regulation. I'm sure that wasn't a secret, or if it was like an open secret. It wasn't hard to see coming. And yet now they're going to act like, how dare these companies do this amid this tragedy? Well, maybe you should have thought of that when you were writing this rules. Like, okay, well, they're going to respond by blocking news. Could that be bad in this scenario that could happen, or this scenario? It's like, but your lack of planning does not constitute an emergency on Facebook's part. It's like you done messed up. Now you're reaping what you sowed. So I find the whole thing, I have no sympathy whatsoever for Justin Trudeau or any of these other meddling Canadian politicians. I just think that they messed this up. And it's just, to me, more evidence of why, like, tech regulations, I'm generally skeptical of regulation, but of all things, to expect lawmakers that are often old and decrepit, like, our friend Joe we were talking about earlier, but are also just generally, not experts and not technologically literate, to expect them to regulate the most complex and ever-evolving, rapidly evolving industries is a recipe for disaster in most cases. So I just think maybe just stop. Like there wasn't a pressing problem here that needed to be addressed. There was no threat to anyone's health or safety, but you meddled, you messed things up, and now you should learn a lesson from it, but instead they're all just playing the victim.
Right. And I think it's an important reminder that public policies, laws, they always have unintended consequences. And that is why they should be excessively limited. They should not be interfering in much. They should actually be letting the free market work and let it determine what people need and get those resources to them, because it will always be more efficient. It'll always come with fewer unintended consequences. And so I don't have any sympathy for these people whatsoever, but it does really irk me when you see people put really asinine things into place. You're absolutely right. They were warned about how this would work out. It has been tried in other places, and there were many experts who have weighed in on how this would all unfold, and yet they still did it because they were actually greedy, because they wanted more power and control. And then when it actually gets people harmed, they want to come in and push the blame on somebody else, point fingers elsewhere. One thing I've loved seeing is the Twitter community notes is having none of it as they try to push the spin. So one of their parliamentary members said, Meta's reckless choice to block news before the act is even enforced is hurting access to vital information on Facebook and Instagram. We are calling on them to reinstate news sharing today for the safety of Canadians facing this emergency. We need more news right now, not less. And she got a community note that says, Meta is following Bill C-18 to the letter of the law. The bill states Meta will negotiate payment or stop the links on their platform. Meta stopped the links. And so watching them pitch these absolute fits is absurd. And I hope that this gets to their people. I mean, I really do, because who you put in power matters. And when you put these complete authoritarians, these busybodies over the market, you're going to have bad things happen to you. It's a recipe for disaster. And I do want to remind people in America, they are trying to pass the same thing here. I've been talking about this a bit. I think we've talked about it on the show before, but just as a quick refresher, there's something floating around right now. It's the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act of 2022. It's Senate Bill 673. It is sponsored by none other than Karen Klobuchar. Just kidding, Amy Klobuchar. But it has a number of co-sponsors on it, and they're bipartisan. It's actually quite concerning. There's a number of other Democrats on it, but in addition to the Democrats, there are several Republicans who are currently co-sponsors on this bill. You have Senator Kennedy, Loomis, Collins, Graham, Cassidy, Thune, Wicker, and Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat, but still disappoints me when he doesn't act right. So this is concerning. They are trying to do the same thing here. This is not about protecting journalism. This actually would hurt independent journalists. This is about protecting the mainstream media, propping up dying legacy brands, and trying to keep control of the narrative. That is the incentive for Republicans and Democrats to do this kind of thing, is they want to be able to control the information you're getting, the narrative you're getting. And it worked a whole lot better for them to do that before you had independent media. What happens when you see something like Canadians' law is that when they remove all these links, the big companies like the New York Times, they still have big websites that are more known to the average person. So they're still going to be in existence. They're still going to get traffic. But independent companies rely on being able to share their links and drive traffic to their websites by posting them on social media companies. And so when these kinds of bills pass and the companies strip all news links, who that actually hurts, who actually goes under, are the independent media people, the independent journalists. And I think that that is actually the intention in this case. You cannot be on this kind of legislation and claim to be a capitalist. There is nothing about that is capitalism. This is just sheer protectionism. I think it actually is a violation of free speech, because you are harming the ability for people to share information and to actually communicate with one another online when you're doing this. The whole thing about it is disastrous, and the fact that we keep seeing it pop up in different countries, including in the US, is concerning and something that people need to be more on top of, because these sorts of things, they fly under the radar, right? The mainstream media isn't telling you about this because they want it. They want to knock out their competitors. They don't know how to actually effectively compete with people who are getting information out via TikTok or Twitter. And so this is what they're going to keep trying. So it failed in Australia. It's failing terribly in Canada right now. It will fail anywhere it is attempted from there on out. So it should be unilaterally condemned.
Hey guys, Brad here. I just want to make sure you're staying in the loop on all things space politics. We've also got 2 new shows you should check out. One is my new show, Damage Control, where I'm teaming up with right-of-center LGBT guests to restore sanity on these increasingly unhinged issues. Then there's Hannah's show, Propaganda, where she's reacting to videos of police brutality and exposing the systemic flaws in the U.S. criminal justice system. Check these all out on our individual Facebook and YouTube pages. And remember, Base Politics is a nonprofit organization, so you can help us move the culture through content by going to base-politics.com and donating today. All right, well, up next, one TikToker really blew up complaining about the fact that life after graduation is not all it's cracked up to be after college graduation, and raised the question of whether we're really preparing young people for life after they leave the campus. Let's take a look.
We really need to start talking about life post-college. It low-key sucks. I just graduated from the University of Michigan 2 months ago, and I've been living in the city of Chicago. Nobody talks about the 9-to-5 grind. Literally be working from 9 to 5 for the rest of your life until you die, basically. The monotony of it every day is awful. Live for the weekends or try to make your life fun, fresh, and flirty during the week, which is hard because you're just exhausted. How much taxes get taken out of your salary? Got my first paycheck, and I was like, oh, that's it? Did I read what my offer was correctly? Because that was not it. Like, this is not how much I signed up to get. But especially in a city like Chicago, everything is so expensive. Taxes, restaurant, there's a 3% surcharge. This paycheck, post-taxes, top of the prices of Chicago, you're still poor. It is so hard to make friends. You're not in clubs. You're not seeing same people every day other than work. It's very difficult to meet people. You have to kind of go out of your way in order to actually try to make friends. Everyone is usually pretty busy, so even if you want to try to make friends, you have to take time to go and do that and go and do stuff in order to make the friends that you want to make. No one has time for each other. You live in your first apartment, you don't realize what you don't have. You don't have a can opener. I have 12 cans of tuna fish, and I don't have a can opener to open it because it never occurred to me to ever buy a can opener. I had to go to the store and buy batteries the other day. I don't have a battery cabinet like I do at home. Let me know if you want more.
So, Hannah, I had a mixed reaction because there were parts of this video that made me really roll my eyes and cringe, and I wasn't very sympathetic at all. But there were things that she identified that I actually thought were legitimate complaints or like things that she's noticed about modern life that are actually, not great. So what was your take?
I think my take is going to surprise you or maybe some of our audience listeners, but I hard vibed with her. I remember feeling exactly like this when I graduated, and I've been out of school, oh gosh, like 11 years now. So it's been a while back, but I didn't think I was somebody who graduated that was very coddled, right? I was an oldest child. I worked really hard. I interned and worked and volunteered and performed all through college. So I was very, very busy. I wasn't just a scumbag when I graduated. I got a job right away. But I remember feeling like I'd been hit by a semi-truck by life. I did not feel like society or my parents had really prepared me for that transition. I found it to be very, very lonely. I went from having, a ton of friends around me, a really great social life, friends who lived right next to me because, we were all going to the same college, to living with strangers, working with strangers, my friends they were grinding in their first jobs. We had crazy hours. I didn't even have a 9 to 5 when I first graduated because I graduated in 2011 during the Great Recession fallout. Nobody had full-time jobs. We were all just doing like side work, hustling, hourly wages. So it was really tough to see people very poor. I had no idea how to manage money. Like, I remember my first big girl interview I went in for, and they asked me how much salary I needed, and I was just like, I don't know, $25,000 a year, because I thought that sounded like a lot. And then I told my parents that, and they were like, Hannah, you cannot live on $25,000 a year. But I had no concept of money really, because even though I had been working throughout college, I'd never actually paid bills. My parents had paid for everything. So yeah, I found myself very much in her shoes, and it's sort of embarrassing to admit, but I like that she brought this up because I don't think we do a good job of helping people transition from this period of your life. And, maybe it's because I was homeschooled, but I also, once I did get into a 9 to 5 job after, 6 or 7 months out of school, I found it incredibly demoralizing, like having to just sit there for 8 hours for no reason because I was really fast at the work, not being able to work outside if it was nice. Like, all of that just felt really very inhumane to me, for lack of a better term. Like, I was like, why can't we just do things differently? Like, I don't mind working, but why is it structured like this? That couldn't it be done so much better? And I still think that to a large degree. That's why I'm a huge proponent of remote work when at all possible. I think that there's just better ways of doing things than often what we have set up. And the last thing I'll add is, we don't teach people to go to college for careers that they want. I think that oftentimes we just say, just go to college, right? That's the narrative people are told, is you just need to get a degree and then you'll be able to make good money and you're going to have a great life and everything will just be handed to you and fall into place. And that's not true. A lot of people get degrees that don't pay off. And then a lot of people get degrees where it does lead to a job, but they don't actually like the work. They don't actually have the ability to see what their day-to-day would look like in that chosen profession until after they're already out of school, which is crazy. That's why we need things like apprenticeships. I went to school for a very expensive degree to work in music and hated it, and then had to figure out how to parlay into another career I would actually like and find meaningful, which was really hard to do and took a lot of extra work. And so I think that's another problem, is that we don't give people the ability to sort of envision what they want their life to look like, what the options are, and to choose adequately. So then they get out and they're miserable.
Yeah, I guess I have a slightly different take, but I agree with a good bit of what you said. I don't have a ton of sympathy for the complaints about, oh, woe is me, I hate working a 9 to 5, in part because you don't have to work a 9 to 5. There are literally so many options, and especially with labor so in demand right now, there are so many. You could drive for Uber, would have a remote job where you can work from outside, off hours. Like, there's so many non-traditional work options. 15 years ago, yeah, you would have just been stuck in a 9 to 5, but you're really not forced into that. And then even if you are, it's like the labor conditions that most people throughout all of human history worked in. And now this idea that you're like traumatized or just so deeply unhappy with sitting in an air-conditioned office, working at a desk for 8 hours a day, I just don't have a ton of sympathy for that, to be honest, that aspect of it. I think when she goes off about her taxes, I totally feel that. I relate to that so much. Like, when I graduated from college and my first job, I was making $50,000. I like divided that by 12 and it's like, oh, well, that's how much I'll have. But then I got to like subtract 10% for taxes or something. And LOL, you thought it was way more, but so I will say though, how many Gen Z TikTokers do you think support progressive policies that involve huge taxes on everyone? Like, do you think they're supporting limited government where we could have a 5% flat tax? I don't think so. I don't know this woman specifically, but though the most interesting part, I'm sorry, I have no sympathy about like, I didn't know I needed a can opener, so just go buy one. Like that's not a big deal. I don't have a place to put batteries. I think you can figure that one out. But the social stuff I thought was the most interesting complaint about this, because I think that rang so true in high school and in college, whether it's sports teams or classmates or clubs that you're in. You have this built-in social structure to make friends and to feel like a part of a community. But once you leave that in the world today, because, this is the whole book about bowling alone, right? Like the bonds and institutions that helped build friendships. Like I don't have a ton of friends outside that I don't know from work or have a family connection to, or I've lived somewhere new for a year and a half now, and I've struggled to meet people. I finally have made some friends and met some people, but it's like, it is difficult because the way that our social lives have changed and the way that our connections are made is so different now. I think there's also an aspect of it for men that's slightly unique, but for women too, it's like, you don't have the same. I felt like a part of a community when I was in a high school, right? Where people knew each other, where we all had common interests, common events going on. In college, not so much, because I went to a massive college with more than 30,000 students, but I was a part of clubs and groups and subgroups where I made friends and had connections with people. Then it's like you go out into the real world, quote unquote, and you have your work, you connect with people through your work. But if you don't go to church, some people get that through church, that kind of community, that making friends. You really have to seek it out in other ways. It's not like it can't be done, but it takes very conscious and deliberate putting yourself out there, getting out of your comfort zone. And so it can be very isolating. And I think a lot of people do feel like they don't have friends in the same way they used to when they were in college or whatever, now that they're in the workforce. And I think that she's identified something real there that we've got to kind of figure out, because it's definitely having a bad effect on a lot of young people.
Yeah, I found it really detrimental. I had a hard couple years when I first graduated college. I also, because of that, fell into like a really bad relationship just because I was lonely and like wanted people around, to be honest. And I think on top of the difference in schedules and people moving and like their lives just shifting, I think when you graduate college, for many people, it's the first time that like you sort of stand on your own. And I mean that socioeconomically. So up until college, you're mostly around people in high school and college who have similar backgrounds to you, right? Your families are probably in pretty similar positions or places in life because of how we zone schools and things. And then you graduate and it's like, no, now you're just your own person. So for me, I went from having access to a lot of very successful people, a lot of wealthy people, to all of a sudden, like, that wasn't who I was around anymore. I really feel like I started on the bottom rung socially and had to like climb back up in many aspects and sort of earn my own position in the world. And I didn't realize until I had graduated college how much I had benefited from my family and their connections, because we had moved a lot. That wasn't new to me. But every time we would move, I always had immediate friends, people asking me to do things. And I think I thought it was because of me. And really, it was my family. Like, it was their position in the communities, their connections, people, trying to make sure I was accommodated because of that. And when you graduate college, like, you no longer have that. You're just out there on your own. And it really was destabilizing to me in a lot of ways. And, I think that there are things we could do to hopefully make that transition a little bit less isolating, less lonely, less confusing and scary. I've moved several times now in my adult life, and it is still hard to make friends. Moving to Atlanta 2 years ago, I really benefited mostly just from the political community here. People I either knew online or who I worked with formerly at FEE or who were just politically active and knew of me and my work. And so that's been really wonderful, and I've been able to make a lot of friends. But I will still say, the grind of the day in, day out, I don't see those people every day. I don't talk to those people every day. And so when you go from having roommates and people that you live with and your families that you live with to living on your own, like, that is a new turn of events too. So it really is just a pretty big time of upheaval in people's lives that we don't even address. We don't tell them to think about it or prepare for it. And I think the reason for that is in prior generations, most of those people were getting married. And in the Deep South, that's still true. You'll see people get married as they're graduating college or right after they graduate college. And so they kind of have this seamless transition into the family life again. And
there's a good bit of that in the Midwest as well, but not in the Northeast where I'm from. Nobody does that there.
But I think that makes that transition easier. Whereas, when you don't do that, there is this whole new sort of segment of life that we need to pay a little bit more attention to for people.
All right, well, let's move on to our hot takes and round out the show. Hannah, what do you have for us this week?
All right, so my hot take, I'm not sure I'm willing to say this should be illegal because, again, I think that laws should be few and far between. But I don't think companies should put tags in clothing ever. I am so textile sensitive. Like, when I was a kid, if something scratchy touched me, like certain different materials, I would literally cry. And even thinking about that now gives me goosebumps. I can't stand certain materials, and tags in clothing are often one of them. When they scratch you, and even when you cut them out, they still scratch you. And there's no need. I don't need that much information about this piece of clothing. Literally just print it on there, like the size, and if it's hand washable or not. And that's pretty much all I need you to tell me. And you could actually just put that on the tag that you cut off when you purchase it with the price on it, and we're good. So I would like to advocate against tags in clothing. They're awful. They really bother me, and there's no need for them to exist.
So my hot take is that people need to stop putting extremely disturbing things on the internet with no preface whatsoever, just to milk advertising revenue or money. So I'm scrolling Twitter today, and I see a video pop up in my feed from one of these accounts that just posts viral content of a little girl whose mom is putting up the window in her car, but the girl has her head stuck out the window and doesn't realize it. And so the thing comes up and starts suffocating the girl. And I'm like, why is this on my timeline? I didn't know I thought I was about to see something funny or cute. And they're all panicking, trying to get her out, and she's stuck. And she goes limp. And I'm like, I don't want to see this.
Oh my God. Did she make it?
I don't know. I browsed away. I'm assuming that she does, but I'm like, you see a lot of this, right, on these viral accounts where they post crazy moments or whatever. And they'll post the disturbing stuff with no warning. And it's I don't want to see this. I don't know why it's being fed to me. But I guess this is my broader hot take. I think Twitter is being run into the ground by Elon Musk. I think they're making so many bad changes at once, it's hard to keep up. And one of them is the monetization, which I think I made $100 from so far. I'll take the money. But people are already, because you get paid by views on your replies, people are already posting what's just engagement bait, just obviously trollish content or outrageous or the most extreme viral stuff, just so they can get lots of eyeballs and just cash checks or whatever. And it's kind of not having a good effect on the platform. So Elon, just pause. Elon, to get philosophical, Chesterton's fence. Elon is changing a lot of things about Twitter without thinking about why they were put there in the first place. So, for example, he's getting rid of the block button. And it's yet at the same time, blocking people who criticize him for getting rid of the block button. So it's like, maybe rethink this, because clearly this does serve a purpose and is important to a lot of people. Yet you're just making these changes like off the cuff. I don't know. I think it's really chaotic. I'm officially off the Musk fanboy train.
Yeah, I've had to retract my hot comments. I mean, I always knew he was a bit of a troll, but it seemed like most of his instincts were positive, and that it feels like it's changing. I don't know if he's being audience captured and just kind of getting like more chaotic because of all the left-wing criticism at him after he took over Twitter. But I agree with you. It's getting weird. I love being able to make money off of platforms as a content creator. I think that's a really great opportunity, but I prefer to see models where it's like advertising baked into your content. Like if you make a video or something like that, just monetizing engagement, I do think is a perverse incentive that's going to make Twitter a complete cesspool. And I'm with you. I've already seen a change in like the kinds of things that people are posting. And then you have to check yourself, and make sure, am I just posting this for engagement? Because I think I made like $200 out of nowhere from it randomly. And, that was just within like a week or two since it got added to my account. So I'm with you. I don't like that kind of thing. My algorithm, fortunately, knows I don't want to see violence or anything, though. It instead feeds me an absurd amount of like therapy, psychology TikToks, which drives my boyfriend insane because I'm constantly sending them to him. And he's like, stop sending me therapy TikToks. And I'm like, this is fascinating.
Is it passive aggressive? Are you sending him ones that are like at him?
Yeah, I'm like, look, you can fix this or you can work on. I think that's a great way of like saving money. You don't have to go to see a therapist. You can just watch TikTok. But like, I self-apply it too. I send him ones that are about me as well, where I'm like, this is me. I need to work on this. So I just like being self-aware. I assume that everybody else does, but I increasingly find I am incorrect in that assumption. And most people prefer to not be self-aware. So I'm trying to limit my TikTok sending and keep it to myself. Anyways, all right, guys, that's a wrap. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to leave us a comment, subscribe to the channel, and until next week, stay based.